Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here, the host of the System Simplified podcast, where I feature top founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And today's episode is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group, where we create, document, optimize, and implement processes and procedures so businesses can grow and thrive. And today's guest is Max Friar. Hi, Max.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. We're going to have a great conversation. We're going to talk about a topic that a lot of business owners are interested in, and especially our listeners, because we are talking about merger and acquisition for companies, for mid-sized companies. And your story is fascinating. And we're going to talk about the growth of your own company and also how you help business owners with their merger and acquisition. Sounds good?
Sounds great. Thank you.
Good. And well, first of all, I want to give a big shout out to Ken Tropke, who actually introduced us. So thank you, Ken. And Ken has been a guest on the podcast as well. And we are going to include that episode in the show notes so our listeners can check it out. So Max, let me introduce you a little bit better, and then I'm going to have you talk about more, add to the bio. So you are the founder of Calder Capital, and you founded it in 2013. And you basically grew your company tremendously that you 3 times in a row, you got the award from fastest growing company, one of the fastest growing companies from Inc. 5000. You made it to the Inc. 5000 list as one of the fastest growing companies, which is a tremendous achievement. I mean, when I understand what goes into that award, and it shows that you are dedicated to growth, and growth, of course, meaning dedicated to help your clients to do better and to give better results. So what I would like let's start first of all, tell us a little bit more about Calder Capital. Who do you serve, and why did you decide to found it?
Yes, thank you for having me on. So I'll try to be brief about how I came to start Calder Capital. So I was working in the industry. I worked in the industry since 2005. And what I mean by the industry is I really enjoyed working with smaller businesses. So usually these were owner operators and founders that were had taken their company and grown it for 20, 30, 40 years sometimes. And they were at a point in their lives when they wanted to slow down, they wanted to sell their business, they wanted to think about retirement, and they didn't have children, they didn't have employees, they didn't know anyone personally that was able to or wanted to buy their business. And so they would hire the firms that I worked for and ultimately hire me selectively to help them through that process. And when I got into the industry, I was just fascinated by how complex it was. I mean, it deals with all elements of, sure, financials. People talk about business valuation all the time, but you're talking about psychology, you're talking about attachment, you're talking about, there's a lot of soft sides to selling a business that really aren't discussed. And, you have to, as the advisor, bring it all together. And ultimately what you're doing is you're helping an owner through what is oftentimes the most significant event of their life. And for some owners, it's more significant than having children and getting married, because they have literally wedded themselves to their company, and its continuity and success is of utmost importance to them. So
That's very true.
I worked for 2 other firms, and in short, the first firm I worked for was an ethical company. They did the right thing, but there was really no creativity or entrepreneurship that flowed through the company. So the processes and procedures were basically copying just what everybody else did. And as a result, to me, they were not being as successful as they could be. And so I ended up jumping to another firm where literally it was the opposite. Very creative, very entrepreneurial, but ultimately the leadership, in my opinion, was short-sighted in decision making and how they treated the staff. And I could give specific examples if you'd like me to, but the culmination of those two experiences led me to believe that if I started my own firm, I could combine ethics with creativity. And I believe that's what, at least to date, that's what we've done with Calder, is try to be an inventive, creative company, process oriented, but also make the right decisions, both for our team and for our clients.
That sounds great. So let's talk a little bit more about M&As, okay, for that particular industries and market that you service, which will be basically the mid-level market, wouldn't you say?
Lower middle market, yes.
Lower middle market.
Yep.
What do you define? Because, you know, there's so many definitions out there. So what is your definition of lower middle market?
It's true. The definition changes depending on who you ask. So we operate and we excel for companies as small as 2 million. So that's about the bottom of where we serve. And we typically go up to about 50 million. So we have certainly sold companies that are less than 2 million and companies that are more than 50 million, but our sweet spot is really that 2 to 50. And the reason that we've focused on that segment is primarily because if you go under 2 million, there are a lot of what are called Main Street business brokers that are they kind of run their businesses more like unsophisticated real estate practice, right? So it's like getting listing agreements and there's not a lot of organization. There's a lot of luck involved with that. There's not a lot of process or infrastructure, and there's a lot of competition there. So we're not really interested in playing in that market. And then above 50 million, you tend to get into what are referred to as investment bankers. And I guess the way I look at it is there are a lot of firms that are fighting over a relatively small amount of transactions. I don't know if this data is accurate, but I looked at data recently, and if you go back to 2003, so fast forward 21 years, they're kind of on average 80 transactions done that are over $50 million a year by private equity. And that seems low to me. And I'm sure that the data source I got that from, wasn't privy to all the transactions that are happening.
Mm-hmm.
But if you contrast that against that lower middle market where there are literally, hundreds and thousands of deals done per year, I think the niche that we are targeting, to summarize it, there's relatively low competition and a relatively high amount of transactions.
Right. That makes sense. So you concentrated on that.
Yep.
You said you're very process driven, and I know you grew year after year and you got the award, the Inc. 5000 award for one of the fastest growing companies. How do you feel that having processes in place contributed to your growth?
Well, I feel strongly that if you don't have well-defined standard operating procedures and processes, especially as you get to be the size we are now, which in 2024 we're closing in on about 50 staff. If you don't have well-defined processes, it's basically impossible to grow because everything becomes custom, and with custom there's no consistency. Messaging is difficult. Onboarding new employees, new clients is difficult because you can't send a consistent message. And so really, in order to grow, we've realized we have no choice but to become a little bit more rigid and defined on how we run our business. And that starts with valuation for clients. So we make sure that every new prospective seller, we do an intense business valuation for them. And we don't allow our clients, we don't take on clients or take them to market to sell unless they go through that process. And one of the reasons we do that is because if we don't go through that, we don't know what their expectations really are, right? And we need to make sure that we are spending our time and we're spending their time, on a client and a process where the result is likely to be positive because valuation expectations are in line with market realities. I can give definitely more examples of processes, but I mean, that is that's I think a good short answer to why we've become process oriented.
Absolutely. Well, give me some other examples of processes that you think are important for growth.
I would say the key differentiator between Calder and almost every other firm that I've seen, and I've seen a lot of firms over the almost past 20 years I've been in the business, is that it seems to be when you have a seller, you have a sell side client, 95% of firms, their go-to-market strategy is they research a list of prospective buyers. And there are a whole bunch of places you can get these lists. There's a resource called PitchBook, for example, that does a really good job of just collecting information on transactions across the world. And then they sell the information about who the buyers are, what the types of deals are that they're doing. And it's very easy to subscribe to something like PitchBook, insert a NAICS code, insert a size of business, and pull a list of companies that have transacted before. And we think that's a good idea, and we do that. But to stop there is ultimately a tragedy, because statistically, if you go out to 100 buyers, you're going to get about 30% that are interested in receiving more information. And out of that 30% or 30 buyers, you're going to get maybe 10% or 3 of them that are interested in really becoming a serious buyer and exploring that seller and making an offer on that business. So ultimately, if you only have 3 offers on a business, you may not get a great offer, and your ability to negotiate, your ability to get close to what your client wants is extremely limited. So
Okay, so what is the solution to that?
well, so what I've spent the past 11 years investing in, and in one way we're different, and we'll never change this because it's a key to our growth, is that no matter who the client is, whether it's a small machine shop or whether it's a $3 million profit distribution company, we not only do the research buy approach that everyone does, and that is not a differentiating factor, but we also have a growing database. At the time of this recording, it's 206,000 buyers, professional advisors, owners that we send an approved of teaser to. And we also pay for, and including our own website, we invest heavily in, but we also pay for all of these other more or less MLS business for sale sites that dominate the ranking, the first page of Google. So we essentially make sure all of our inventory of sellers are as broadly marketed across the internet into all of the buyers we've ever taken in. We're remarketing to them. And we can certainly segment them out based on size and type and industry. But I strongly believe that in order to be successful and really build a market where you can get 30 or 40 or 50 offers, that's going to give you huge opportunity to find the right fit, the right price, the right deal structure, and then negotiate that to be even better. And we found that oftentimes we're able to get a price that's 20% higher than a valuation by running through this. But I firmly believe by being everywhere and then having a process to filter out the 90% of buyers that are not going to be interested in that opportunity, we are maximizing not only the price, but the deal structure and the fit. And I can't emphasize enough how important the fit is culturally to many sellers with who that buyer is that's going to take over their baby. So
absolutely. So basically what you're saying is, okay, you are being proactive, you're not just waiting for people to come to you, but you're sending it out and seeking the right buyer, but also you're looking at the match in terms of the culture. So then it's a legacy thing, right? For the seller, they know that they're selling their business to somebody that will continue the legacy. And that is very important.
It's in short, we are creating a massive marketplace for every client that we have. And in doing so, it creates more work for our company, but it's absolutely in the best interest of the client to have more interest than less. And most of our competition, because they don't have automation, and we can talk about that if you'd like, we have a lot of automation of communication sequences built into our business to make sure that we're not spending our people hours on conversations that are going to go nowhere, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And as I said, 90% of buyers are going to pass. So do we really need to be spending our time with those 90%, or can we let automation follow up with these buyers via text, voicemail, email, to make sure that we're following up professionally with every single person that comes through our doors, but we're not spending our advisors' time with people that are just going to pass, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So tell me, how do you automate? How do you automate? What do you use for automation? What did you find successful?
So we use a CRM. It's called Keep, Keap. There are a variety of CRMs that are similar. I mean, the well-known ones like HubSpot and Salesforce probably do more than what Keep does. But essentially, 10 years ago, I kind of had this epiphany that if I had to, for example, email, so every buyer that inquires on a business for sale has to answer qualifying questions, has to sign a non-disclosure agreement, has to be approved of by our team to move on to that next step. It's very inefficient, but if you think about it, this is not like selling real estate where we can publish addresses and names and people can come visit. I mean, they can't. When you're selling a company, it's very confidential. So we have to mask the identity of our client. And then everyone that wants to learn more information has to be vetted and has to agree to confidentiality. So it's initially a very inefficient process. So I thought 10 years ago, how will I ever run more than 5 deals if I have to do all these things administratively myself? So that was the beginning of what's been an ongoing process that continues today, where we are creating automated sequences of communication. So for example, if a buyer inquires, a person does take their information, enter it into our CRM, and then by application of a tag, moves them on to the next part of the sequence. For example, signing a non-disclosure agreement. If they don't sign a non-disclosure agreement, then they're reminded via text and email multiple times to sign the non-disclosure agreement. And we kind of figure after you're reminded 4 or 5 times, you don't sign it, you're probably not interested, right? But after they sign that, then it's the next sequence, right? And ultimately, what we've done here is we've made sure that, for example, if I'm running a project, I'm representing a seller, and I'm going out to this huge market and I'm going to have 200 buyers asking for information, I'm using technology to help me navigate through those 200 buyers, because I know statistically, project after project, out of 200, only about 20 are going to be really interested in becoming serious.
That's right. That's absolutely correct. Absolutely. Now, what do you think about how important are processes, documented processes, in a business that you are selling? I mean, do you feel like it makes a difference in terms of the price, in terms of what you're getting, the interest of the buyer? Do you have any? What's your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So it's shockingly rare that most small businesses have written standard operating procedures or even standard job descriptions, job aids for their team. So when the more organized and operationally efficient and organized a seller can present themselves, the stickier the interest is going to be. So for example, if we put out a manufacturing company that made $1 million a year, we're going to get a ton of interest. We're probably going to have 250 buyers in the first week or two that are going to specifically request information about that seller. Now, let's say the seller, the owner works 60 hours a week, runs machines, does all the sales quotes, doesn't have anything documented, everything's inside their head. It's going to be, maybe not infinitely, but there are going to be more hurdles to get over in selling that business than, say, for example, it's a business where the owner has documented and standardized their process and procedures, their job aids, they have a management team, they're able to work 10 hours a week and go on vacation 2 months a year. There are going to be a lot more buyers that are interested in the latter because it's not as reliant on the owner. So when you ask that question, I'm tying my answer to, the more that the owner can get out of their head and onto paper, the less reliant the business is hypothetically on that owner, and then the more marketable it is. And the more marketable it is, the more competition, the higher offers that they'll likely get.
Absolutely. Do you have some examples you can share?
I mean, so we work with, so in that spectrum of $2 million companies to $50 million companies. So let's go to the extremes, right? If we're dealing with a company that's worth $2 million, typically there is no management team, right? There's typically an owner, maybe the owner has a key manager, but typically that company at some point, oftentimes it's run by a technician who kind of feels like they have to have their hands in everything.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, if they've done everything, if they're overseeing every quote, if they're overseeing the quality of every job, if they're hiring all the people, if they're training most of the people, they oftentimes haven't seen a need to take the time to document and standardize and write things down. And that just makes it more difficult for a buyer to understand how to take over that company and operate it. That makes sense, right?
Yeah.
If you're if you're if you're the owner of a $50 million company worth $50 million, chances are you have a full management team. Chances are you have very standardized operating procedures. Chances are you're, ISO certified. You've got other certifications. You've taken the time to standardize and professionalize almost everything about your business, and you've probably made yourself rather irrelevant to the success of that company, other than perhaps as a visionary or setting goals or some level of accountability. You're not necessary to the day-to-day operation. So if you're a buyer and you're looking at the first business that's 2 million or the second one that's 50 million, that 50 million is much more attractive because the business can hypothetically run for a long time, even if the owner were to pass away. Right? So I'm not giving specific examples, but I'm giving kind of a generalization of what companies at both ends
Absolutely. I mean, it's an
look
asset
like.
protection because you are buying something. And, I give you an example. Like we got a call from a client, I mean, before he became a client, when he called us, and he just bought a business, and he realized that all the knowledge of his business is actually sitting in somebody's head. Two key employees that were in their upper 60s, and if they left or something happened to them, it will be a problem because all basically the knowledge resides in their heads, and he doesn't know how to operate the machines or whatever needed to be operated there. So then we came and we did a knowledge transfer, created the SOPs, improved upon them, and then all of a sudden it's like such a peace of mind because you can actually now know that what you invested in will be retained.
Yeah. And I realize that this is not, I want you to use this, what I'm about to say, as a marketing piece or advertisement for you, but what you did for that company, that will improve the marketability of every single client that you work for. I would recommend what you're doing there for every prospective seller. And while it's so you probably get some resistance sometimes because people don't want to pay for things or they don't see the value in it right away. But if you think about it, it's intangible to an extent, in that there's not necessarily a dollar value that you can drop to the bottom line instantly, right? So someone might be able to argue, well, my actual valuation at the time hasn't improved because of that. But if you think about it from a marketability perspective, that business will be so much more attractive to so many buyers if marketed correctly, that it will increase the amount of offers, which increases your negotiating leverage, which increases your valuation.
Max, you're so right, because, and you also, what you said is correct. It can't be just one thing. It has to be a multiple approach. It has to be, the approach has to encompass multiple factors. So it's the process documentation, but then it's how you market it. You have to market it correctly. You have to reach a lot of people. The value of the communication, the quality of the communication is very important. And that's basically what you're doing. So it is definitely very, very valuable. So Max, if people want to find out more about you, how can they contact you?
I'm on LinkedIn. I get a lot of messages on LinkedIn that are not great about sales and marketing. So I don't always go on LinkedIn every single day, but LinkedIn is one way. Just Google or Max Friar LinkedIn, come up. My email is just max@caldergr.com. That's another way to contact me. Those are probably the best ways. Maybe I should use Twitter. I don't. So I'm not really great with social media. So email or LinkedIn are probably the best ways to get a hold of me.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Max, for being a guest on this podcast. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you as well. I've really enjoyed my time. Good questions.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.